Thunder crashes overhead, shaking the lonely road. Rain pours in sheets, creating a gray curtain that blurs the world. Diep walks alone. She walks away from the prison, away from the bag of money, away from the man who shattered her soul. Her steps are heavy. Every breath feels like inhaling glass. She clutches her stomach, a sharp, cramping pain twisting her insides. It's not just hunger. It's a visceral warning. Her vision swims. Black spots dance. She stumbles, knees hitting the wet pavement with a crunch. She tries to get up, but her limbs refuse. The world tilts. As darkness claims her, she hears tires screeching and a car door thrown open. James sprints through the rain. He ignores his ruined Italian shoes. He reaches Diep just as her head hits the concrete. He catches her, sliding on his knees, pulling her limp body into his arms. Her skin is burning hot, yet she shivers violently. James screams her name, his voice raw against the thunder. She doesn't answer. He lifts her. She feels terrifyingly light. He runs back to the Bentley, shouting at the driver. He dives into the back seat, clutching Diep. "Hospital!" he roars. "Go! If she dies, you die!" The driver slams the gas. James brushes wet hair from Diep's face. He sees the bruises on her wrists from the handcuffs he put there. Guilt severs his composure. He rocks her, whispering a frantic prayer. "Don't leave me, Diep. Hate me, but don't leave me." The emergency room doors burst open. James barges in, carrying Diep, shouting for a doctor. Nurses rush with a gurney. They pry Diep from his arms. James tries to follow, but a guard blocks him. He grabs the guard, ready to kill, but the doctor steps in, shouting at him to let them work. James freezes. He watches them wheel Diep away. The white light of the corridor blinds him. James collapses onto a plastic chair. He looks at his hands. They shake uncontrollably, stained with mud and the invisible blood of betrayal. 10 minutes pass. It feels like 10 years. The doctor comes out. His expression is grave. James stands up instantly. "Is she okay?" he asks, trembling. The doctor judges the expensive suit and desperate eyes. "She is malnourished, exhausted, and under extreme stress," he says coldly. "But the bleeding stopped. We stabilized both patients." James blinks. "Both?" he whispers. "What do you mean? Both?" The doctor checks his clipboard. "You didn't know? She is 4 weeks pregnant. She almost miscarried due to shock. It is a miracle the heartbeat is still there." The words hit James like a blow. Pregnant. 4 weeks. He calculates instantly. 4 weeks ago. The night at the shack. The night they celebrated Nee's birthday. The night they promised a future. A child. His child. Growing inside her while he framed her, while he handcuffed her. He falls back into the chair, covering his face. A sound escapes him. Half laugh, half sob. He almost killed his own child. The realization is an acid bath for his soul. "Can I see her?" James whispers. The doctor nods. James walks into the room. Diep lies on the bed, an IV drip attached to her bruised arm. She looks lost in the white sheets. Her eyes stare at the ceiling, empty and dead. James walks to the bedside. He wants to touch her hand but pulls back. Terrified, his touch is poison. "Diep," he whispers. Diep doesn't blink. She speaks to the ceiling, voice raspy. "Why am I still alive?" "You fainted," James stammers. "I brought you here." "You should have let me die," she says. "It would have been cleaner." James drops to his knees. "Diep, listen. The doctor, he told me. You're pregnant." Diep moves. Her hand flies to her stomach. Her eyes widen with horror. She turns to look at him. "No," she whispers. "No." "Yes," James says, tears streaming. 4 weeks. It's ours, Diep. A baby. Diep stares at him. A dry, terrifying laugh bubbles up. "Ours?" she spits. "There is no us, James. You killed us when you put those cuffs on me." She sits up, wincing, grabbing the bed rail. Get out! Diep, please! James reaches for her. Don't touch me! Diep screams. She yanks her hand away, ripping the IV needle out. Blood spurts onto the sheet. Get away! You want to take this too? You took my freedom, my dignity. Now you want my baby? I want to protect you, James yells. Protect? Diep laughs, crying. You are the danger. You hurt me. Mr. Hon didn't handcuff me. You did. She throws a glass of water at him. It shatters on his chest. Go tell your father. Tell him to come kill it. Isn't that what you do? James stands there, bleeding from words that cut deeper than glass. He sees her fear. She is terrified of him. She thinks he will give the baby to his father. He realizes he cannot tell her the truth yet. He cannot say he plans revenge. If she knows, she might try to help, and Hoan will kill her. He must remain the villain. His phone buzzes. Father. James looks at Diep, curling around her stomach, sobbing. He steps out, closing the door. He answers. Report, Hoan orders. Vance said you jumped out. Where are you? James wipes his face. His expression hardens into steel. Handling loose ends, he lies coldly. She fainted. I wanted to make sure she didn't die and cause a scandal. Is she dead? Hoan asks. No, just weak, James says. I gave her more money. She leaves tomorrow. Good, Hoan says. Make sure she stays gone. If she comes back, you know what happens. Don't get sentimental. You are the heir. I know, James says. I am your son. James hangs up. He crushes the phone until the screen cracks. He looks through the small window of the door. Nurses rush in to calm Diep. She fights them, protecting her stomach like a tigress. James places his hand on the glass. I will burn his world for you, he whispers to the glass. I will take his company, his money. I will leave him with nothing. Keep our baby safe, Diep. Just for a little while. He turns and walks down the long white corridor. His shadow stretches behind him. He is no longer the confused man. He is a hunter, and his father is the prey. The glass of whiskey slams onto the mahogany desk. Amber liquid sloshes over the rim. Mr. Hon sits in his leather chair like a king, watching his son with amused eyes. James stands opposite him. He is still wearing the wrinkled suit from the hospital, smelling faintly of rain, but his demeanor has changed. The hesitation is gone. The guilt is buried under ice. He pours himself a drink, downs it, and meets his father's gaze. He looks like a shark that has tasted blood. He asks if his father is satisfied. Hoan chuckles, lighting a cigar. He says seeing James crush that pest was the proudest moment of his life. He calls Diep a parasite. James grips the empty glass. He imagines smashing it into Hoan's face. He imagines the shards piercing those arrogant eyes. But he forces his hand to relax. He forces a cold smile. He agrees. He says Hoan was right. Love is for the poor, power is for the strong. He tells Hoan he is ready to take his seat at the table, but not just any seat. He demands the Dragon City project, the billion-dollar deal Hoan has been negotiating. Hoan pauses, the cigar freezing. He narrows his eyes, searching for a crack in James's armor. He asks why James wants that project. It is risky. James leans forward, hands on the desk. He lies with the ease of a sociopath. He says he wants to prove he is ruthless. He wants to evict the 2,000 families living on that land without compensation to maximize profit. He wants to finish what Hoan started, but faster. Hoan stares at him. The smoke swirls. Then Hoan laughs. He claps his hands. He says that is the killer instinct he waited for. He slides a thick file across the desk. He gives James full authority. He unknowingly hands James the weapon that will kill him. James takes the file. His fingers don't tremble. He has signed a deal with the devil to burn hell down from the inside. While James cements his place in the empire, Diep flees it. The hospital room is empty. The IV drip hangs uselessly. Diep couldn't stay. Every beep of the monitor reminded her of James. She felt like a prisoner. She limps down the back stairs, disguised in a stolen janitor's jacket. Her body screams. Her stomach cramps, a terrifying reminder of the life inside. 4 weeks. The words echo, a child of the man who destroyed her. She wants to hate it. She wants to tear it out. But her hand stays protectively over her belly. It is innocent. It is the only thing she has left. She steps into the alleyway behind the hospital. The rain has stopped. She has nowhere to go, no money. Her home is a crime scene. She is a ghost. Suddenly, a shadow detaches from the wall. Diep gasps, grabbing a broken pipe. The figure steps into the light. It is Mrs. Huyen, James's mother. She looks old, wrapped in a shawl, face wet with tears. She holds a sleeping Nye. Diep drops the pipe. She rushes forward, taking her daughter. Nye is heavy, warm, smelling of safety. Mrs. Huyen touches Diep's arm, shaking. She whispers she saw everything. She says James is possessed by demons, not himself. Diep pulls away sharply. She tells Mrs. Huyen not to mention his name. She says James is dead to her. Mrs. Huyen nods, sobbing. She presses a thick envelope into Nie's blanket. Jewelry, cash, gold. Enough to hide. She tells Diep to run south, change her name. She warns that Hoan is watching. If he finds out about the baby, he won't let it live. Diep looks at the woman who failed to protect her, but saved her child. She takes the money. She doesn't say thank you. There is no room for gratitude in a heart of ash. She turns, holding Nie tight, and walks into the darkness. She doesn't look back. She disappears into the labyrinth of the city. Back at the Hoan Corporation, James stands in the CEO's office. It is 3 a.m. He is alone. The Dragon City file is open. He is not planning construction. He is planning sabotage. He looks for loopholes, illegal bribes, faulty contracts. He is building a dossier to send Hoan to prison for life, but his eyes drift to the window. Where is she? Is she warm? Is she hating him? The pain is a black hole. He pulls out the pawn shop receipt, proof of his father's theft. He places it next to the file. 2 bullets for 1 gun. The door opens. James sweeps the papers into a drawer. It is Vance, the assistant. Vance looks tired. He walks in, holding a tablet. He says they have a problem. James asks what, voice bored. Vance says the hospital called. Diep is missing. She escaped. And... Vance hesitates. He looks at James. He says the nurses mentioned a pregnancy report. It's missing from her file. James's heart stops. He stands up slowly. He walks around the desk. He gets in Vance's face. He grabs Vance by the tie, choking him. Who else knows? James growls. Does my father know? Vance claws at James's hand, eyes bulging. He shakes his head. No, just me. The hospital called my private line. James stares at him. He sees the fear. He has to choose. Vance is Hoan's eyes. If Vance lives, Hoan knows. If Hoan knows, Diep dies. James tightens his grip. He realizes he crossed a line. He drags Vance to the window. He threatens him. He tells Vance that from this moment, Vance works for him. If a word about the pregnancy reaches Hoan, James will frame Vance for embezzlement in the Dragon City project. He will bury Vance so deep in prison, he will never see the sun. Vance gasps, nodding frantically. James releases him. Vance falls, coughing. James stands over him, adjusting his cuffs. He looks exactly like his father. Find her, James orders. Find her before my father's men do. And when you find her, tell me. Only me. Understand? Yes, Mr. James, Vance wheezes. James turns to the window. He presses his hand against the glass. He is a monster now. He has blackmailed and threatened. He will do worse. He will burn the world to keep the secret safe. Somewhere out there carrying his unborn child is the woman who hates him, and keeping her hating him is the only way to keep her alive.
Diệp gục ngã trong mưa sau khi rời nhà tù, đau đớn và kiệt sức, suýt mất mạng. James bất chấp tất cả đưa cô vào bệnh viện và bàng hoàng phát hiện Diệp đang mang thai 4 tuần đứa con của anh ấy. Sự thật này khiến James nhận ra mình vừa đẩy chính con ruột vào nguy hiểm. Nhưng để bảo vệ Diệp và đứa bé khỏi Mr. Hoàng, anh buộc phải tiếp tục đóng vai kẻ phản bội, chấp nhận để Diệp căm hận. Trước mặt cha, James lạnh lùng tuyên bố chọn quyền lực, dành dự án Dragon City như một vũ khí để phá hủy đế chế Hoàng từ bên trong. Trong khi đó, Diệp trốn khỏi bệnh viện cùng Nhi với sự giúp đỡ âm thầm của Huyền. Tình yêu tan vỡ, hai con người bước vào con đường đối lập. Một người chạy trốn để sống, một người hóa quỷ để bảo vệ.